Okay, so ready.
Sorry for the delay. We have a quorum now. We didn't have a quorum earlier. So we will start the meeting, and I guess we'll start off with if there are any public comments tonight.
Good evening. For the record, Fred Volz. I was just reviewing an update of the past projects in light of agenda item 3 tonight, the discussion about the fiscal year 2021 capital projects. And while I understand the Utilities Department is making some progress in trying to reconcile the budgeted and actual numbers, which varied by almost $27 million, in totaling up the draft, it looks like what we've actually spent is less now on this draft that I believe you've all received by about $600,000 compared to what it was a month ago. So I bring that to your attention, and I know that they're still working on it, and I'm glad that they are trying to figure out where all the money is, but it seems like for us to have an intelligent discussion tonight about 2021, we really need to know how much money is going to be spent or how much isn't going to be spent of that amount that's already been allocated. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, that closed the comment period. Dennis, I guess somehow we didn't get the second copy of the spreadsheet. Do you want to just hand that out one during the time, or do you want to hand that the big? We've got the 8.5, but we didn't get the. No, the other one.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that one. I saw it up here, but I didn't. And it disappeared.
I was carrying it around.
Thank you.
You thought you were going to get it here earlier, so you just. Oh, this is an eye test. Okay. Okay. So the first item, the agenda item, is to discuss or possible action of approval of minutes of the July 31st and September 4th. Now we have comments. I have comments on the 31st, and Dennis, was there a comment from the city on the September 4th?
Yeah, as far as the September 4th goes, they're there in front of you. I guess if the committee would oblige me, what I would prefer is that we move forward with approval with any modifications on the July 31st minutes. I have a preference myself as to not putting in so much detail like we did in the September 4th minutes. So I'd like to take the opportunity to, especially since we're now videotaping and audio, and I really don't want to keep putting in front of the committee 8 pages of a lot of conversation. So I'd like to take those and kind of scrub them a little bit if that's okay with the committee, and go ahead and take action on the July 31st.
I'm okay with that. All right, is everybody else?
I have no problem with it.
Okay. Yeah, I think it would be good if we highlighted the motions. I think that was mentioned last time.
Yes.
And then highlighted.
And they would always be in the minutes. And, really what we would consider, important, difficult, hard questions, stuff we think needs to be in the minutes, that would be in there. Obviously, the presentations would be attached. They're already a part of the agenda. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the one thing, because one of the comments I have, just so I think that for future it'd be helpful too, is if we expand on the theys. In the 31st maybe had a few more. I think some of the other ones might not have had as much, but so we can just elaborate. So that's some of my comments on the 31st, is just to clarify who they is. So
I get you.
For future, but anyway, just bring that up.
Okay.
So I'll go, if you don't mind, I'll go over my changes right quick and then see if anybody else has any changes. And if the changes are acceptable, then I'd be willing to approve the minutes, and then the minutes would be approved after the changes. So would it be next meeting that I would sign off when the changes were made?
You could sign off after the meeting once we make the changes. It didn't have to wait till the next meeting.
Okay. So I'm okay with the first page. Did anybody have any comments on the first page of the minutes for the 31st? Okay. On the second page, at the very top, the sentence starts, then he provided a list of items that will be included in the agenda packet. If we can just add next for the next agenda packet, to help clarify that. Then go down to number 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th line. Sixth line. Yeah, sixth line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sixth line. They will share the presentation. And if that can be, so I don't know if you want Mr. Porter, the utilities, the city, whatever it be.
How about staff?
Staff, that's fine. That sounds good. But I just want to make sure it's not the committee.
Gotcha. Yeah, understand.
Okay. Then the very last sentence. Currently, there were, if I could change that to R, please. There are, and if we can change word R and add the word committee, so it's clear that it's committee business rules that we're talking about.
Okay.
And then the second word in that sentence, we could change that to R also. Under 3, the very last sentence says they are a nonprofit. If we can say utilities are a nonprofit.
Yes.
And then I think under the next paragraph, next Mr. Porter reviewed, then the second sentence started there. The sentence was confusing to me, so a suggestion is that we say a slide showed staffing and there is no staffing for the landfill. If that's okay.
Okay.
And then just a really, really picky one on the very end. At the very end where it says adjournment at 8:17 p.m. just needs a space between the 7 and the P.
Got it. That's an easy one.
So is there any other comments from anybody? No. So if those can be changed, then I would accept them. So I guess we need to take a motion to approve the minutes of July 31st. Do I get a first?
Motion to approve.
Okay, Ned, motion to second?
I second.
Okay, and then so any in favor of voting for the July 3rd minutes to be approved?
July 31st, aye.
Yeah, 31st, thank you. So then we will, we also, I guess, I'm sorry, then to make sure that it's probably, everything is official, then I make a motion that we remove the minutes for the September 4th, and then
Take them to the next meeting.
take them to the next meeting. And can I get a second on that?
I'll second.
Okay, and I get a vote?
Aye.
Aye. So we're all in favor, and so that motion passed. So. Okay, so then next on the agenda is the presentation by Silver State Energy.
So I'd like to introduce Scott Krantz from the Southern Nevada Water Authority and Gail Bates from the Colorado River Commission. I think the four of you probably know that we're a member of the Silver State Energy Association, but I'm not sure everybody on the committee does. So when they watch this on video, they'll get to learn who SSEA is and what they do for the city of Boulder City. So it's all yours.
Great, thank you. And we're glad to be here to be able to present to you today and share a little bit about Silver State Energy Association. You might wonder, as we were introduced as the Director of Energy from Southern Nevada Water and from the Colorado River Commission, why we've got these two entities when we're talking about the Silver State Energy Association. But hopefully we'll be able to cover that in this presentation. So feel free to, if you've got questions along the way, to stop me and ask if you need to. So the Silver State Energy Association is a joint powers association was established by cooperative agreement in August of 2007 with the purpose to jointly plan, own, develop, operate, and maintain generation and transmission facilities, and to buy and sell energy and hedge projects for the benefits of its members. Those members, there's 5 members: City of Boulder City, Overton Power District, Lincoln County Power District, Southern Nevada Water Authority, and Colorado River Commission of Nevada. Each SSEA member appoints 1 director to the SSEA board, and all board decisions require unanimous approval.
I had one question already. Is Rory Dwyer still, he's listed on your website as the member for Boulder City. Is that still the case? Or?
He is not. We will take that. We'll take him off. It's now Dennis, so that
It's funny
changes.
because I was actually on their site today. I noticed that.
Okay.
I'll make a note of that and make sure we update the website. No, Dennis is the Boulder City representative on the board. The structure of the SSEA has no direct employees, which is why the 2 of us are here. So labor and employees from the Southern Nevada Water Authority and the Colorado River Commission are the staff for the organization. An SSEA manager is appointed by the board to run the SSEA, and that has been me since the inception. SSEA is also a project-based organization. So apart from just running the basic organization and keeping it with the minimal just to run the organization, nothing happens in the SSEA except through a separate project agreement that the board approves. And I'll share what those are here in a minute. Each project service agreement is a standalone agreement and is approved by the board. Each member then gets to decide which projects and to what level they want to participate in any project that goes before the board. The SSEA administrative and general expenses, each member shares equally in the minimal kind of operating requirements for the organization. And for the current fiscal year we're in, that was $55,000 and $55,031 is the budget. All other labor and operating expenses are paid for through the various project services agreements that exist.
You'll get to it later, but I guess I just want to make sure I understand. I must have misunderstood the slides, because here you show 55 and you're saying administrative and general, and I believe later on you're showing $311,000.
Yeah, so there's kind of 2, we think of it as the administrative and general for the general organization. Covers very few items really, but kind of, office, computer, support, supplies, a few things like that, but doesn't cover any of the project services agreement. So then when you take all of the CRC and SNWA labor and other larger items, those administrative and general expenses are covered through the project service agreements.
Okay, so the 300 that's listed here is part of what our service agreement, it's Boulder City's
Yes.
service agreements share.
You're right.
Okay, I just wasn't sure I understood that properly. Thank you.
Yeah, so think of it as of all of the total administrative and general or overhead support of the organization, a small piece of that is shared across everyone just for general functions of the organization. The bulk of it is shared or assessed to each of the project service agreements. Next slide there. So we have 3 project service agreements. Project 1 is a joint generation resource planning and evaluation agreement. Project number 2 is the Eastern Nevada Transmission Project. And project number 3 is a power supply management services agreement. And I'll go into each one of those briefly. Project 1 was established in 2007. It had a budget of $1 million, and the expenses to date have been $9,250. So far short of what was put in the budget, obviously. The purpose of this project is to evaluate and determine the feasibility of various generation projects. This was the first project that was approved by the SSEA, and it was at a time when the members were quite interested in some of the solar projects that were coming around, wind projects, geothermal, some gas-fired plants, and so there was a very preliminary study that went into that early on, and none of the members wanted to pursue that after that initial effort any further and haven't since, and so there's been no further efforts and expenses undertaken in that project.
So Scott, I wanted, along those lines, then it means that in the future, are there any thoughts about it getting into some kind of future generation among the group, or right now have you got enough resources out there long-term that'll satisfy the needs for the foreseeable future, or is there any talk about getting into generation at all?
Yeah.
Anymore?
Well, again, we've got a project that would allow us to pursue that if the members wanted to, but to date, none of the members have wanted to pursue any of those projects. So if that were an item that Boulder City wanted to pursue at some point, they could bring it up at the SSEA working group meetings we've got, and we would discuss and could potentially move forward if that was a desire.
So I'm sorry, just repeat to make sure I'm understanding. So currently then this is on hold?
Yes.
This one's on hold?
It's an agreement that's evergreen, so it doesn't have an automatic termination in place. There's a budget set, but no expenses are being incurred. But again, it's more of an enabling type of a project at this point.
Thank you.
Will that PSA number 1 be affected by the new state mandate for green energy? Will that come to life again to look at that?
It won't just because of that new legislation, but to the extent it influences the members to want to, study a project specific, then it could.
Because the way I'm understanding it is the plants over on the 95, the gas-fired plants, they're talking about idling those because it's not green energy. So they're going to have to do something with those 5 turbines or 6 turbines that are on that site, replace them with something else. And I don't know if they can go up into Lincoln County or up north of us and put something else out there. But right now they're talking about those plants being offline within 10 to 15 years.
Bringing up green, I have a question about Hoover and green. Is that something I can bring up now or is best later? I don't want to interrupt too much.
Well, we should probably hold that one because you can bring it up when we get to that section if
That'd be fine.
might be better. The participants in this project are Boulder City, Lincoln County Power District, Overton Power, and Southern Nevada Water Authority. Project number 2 is for the Eastern Nevada Transmission Project. It was established in 2008 with a budget of $2.6 million. Expenses to date on that project, which the project is terminated now, was $396,000. The purpose was to perform all of the required transmission studies, feasibility studies, environmental assessment, right-of-way, and so forth for a transmission project, double circuit 230 kV transmission project that interconnected all of the various SSEA members. That project expired in 2014 with most of the right-of-way grant achieved, but not all of it. And the participants, as you see on there, Boulder City was a small 1% participant, Lincoln County Power at 15%, and Overton and SNWA at 42%.
So question on that, does that tie Lincoln and Overton to Nevada Power system? Is that the deal, or NV Energy system, or?
That would tie Lincoln and Overton together, as well as then it would interconnect with Southern Nevada Water Authority's system.
So that's how Boulder City would get in.
And then all the way down to Meade. So it would interconnect every one of the members of the SSEA.
All right.
But that give us Boulder City a secondary, or just, because if we just go into Meade, that doesn't give Boulder City any secondary aspect, if I'm saying it correctly. So we used to have a link with Nevada Power. But we no longer have that link to my knowledge. And so we don't really have a secondary feed to Boulder City.
Yeah, this would be a secondary feed to Boulder City.
We'd be able to use the Southern Nevada, I'm assuming, maybe? Is there a link to Southern Nevada Water Authority?
Well, it interconnects out of Meade, which is at a different bus, a different interconnection there than in Boulder City has.
Okay.
There is a system that CRC owns actually on behalf of SNWA that interconnects SNWA's major treatment and pumping facilities. And so all of SNWA's major load is served off of that system, and it comes directly out of Meade. But it's a separate feed than what Boulder City is currently has right now.
So it's that tie at Meade to SNWA that would be our link to the rest of them, okay.
Yep.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yep.
Now, is that connected, or is that when this gets done, because all you're saying is you have the right of way, but no physical.
Right, and I'll proceed on here. That particular project got us almost all the way there. And then if you'll hold your breath just a moment, because it wasn't quite finished, what had happened is the group decided to reduce the scope. Many years had passed by. This transmission line happened to go through, at the time, the Sunrise Mountain Instant Study area. It was a very constrained transmission corridor. And it took us a long, long time, almost 10 years, to get this right-of-way ultimately. So enough time had gone forward, and the SSEA members decided we wanted to reduce the scope a little bit and just include achieving a right-of-way, not some of the other things that part of it. So at the PSA number 2's conclusion, we entered into a new agreement, PSA number 2A, to undertake just completing the right-of-way work. We had a budget of $100,000, so you can see we were almost all the way there. It was established in 2014, and we expensed and utilized $37,000 roughly of that budget to complete that project, and we did achieve and received a right-of-way and all the various permits that we need to move forward if the group so chooses.
So was that the bottleneck that was just over between Lake Mead and kind of Sunrise Mountain over on the other side of Lake Las Vegas? And so you actually were able to get a right-of-way through there, huh?
Eventually we were, yes. So we were happy to have that right-of-way.
That's good.
Yeah. Let's see, and the participants are the same and at the same percentage levels as project number 2. This agreement has now since also terminated, so there's no active project 2, but the right-of-way, like I said, is secured. SSEA now holds that for any future desire to move ahead and actually construct that project now.
So are you just waiting for the members to request construction then?
Yes.
Is there any indication that might happen in the near future, or is everybody just on hold?
It's on hold. It's been discussed a lot, and really the time when it started moving forward, unfortunately, it was at a point where most of the members didn't want to take action right at the moment. But again, it's still sitting there for any of us that want to move forward with it.
Are some of the other entities waiting for their additional feed themselves? Does it help them with an additional feed, or? So, because a lot of us are doing okay, Boulder City, it's just a matter if you have a major emergency, if I understand correctly, that second feed would be handy.
Yeah, it provides a lot of different types of benefits for each member, and they're all a little bit different. Lincoln and Overton Power, it would provide a significant reliability upgrade to them, which is their primary desire to participate in it. Southern Nevada Water Authority has some different interests in going up that direction, but.
And additionally, with the completion of the BC tap and the upgrades to the 69 kV loop that completes the radial 69 kV basically around the city, that would actually essentially become a potential third source, which would even bolster the utility if we decided we wanted to invest in that in the future even further.
Who are we connecting with that? So what connection does that give us with the BC and the K69?
The connection is still to the major corridor that goes off of Meade.
Okay, it's just a second.
It's just a second connection. So if we,
okay.
But so yeah, if something happens at Meade, we're covered essentially
I got it.
by
Okay,
the other
right.
connection.
We're completing the city's needs is more.
Yeah,
of those
and
projects. What's inside the city, not where I see the substation. Okay. Sorry.
Right.
Thank you.
and we'll provide some decent maps in the future, so that's easier to see.
I was just a bit puzzled by this 1% figure. I mean, I've never contributed 1% to anything. It's like, what determined that number for Boulder City? That why not zero? I mean, what is there any?
Well, you could ask your, you'd probably ask Ned, as Ned was actually on the SSEA board at the time, but.
Well, I think at the time, it was, there was a state, I mean, future generation, say when we were looking at the IPP project number 3 up in Delta, Utah, we needed a way to get to Boulder City, and there was no real way, and that corridor was a bottleneck at the time. And anything that would give us an option to be able to get a piece of transmission through that corridor would save us a lot of money getting transmission into Boulder City.
Right.
So that was the big deal at the time.
Well, and I may just add to that, this project would carry about 800 megawatts. So 1% of that is, what, 8 megawatts on a system for Boulder City size. You know, it sounds very, very small, but it's still a significant, you know, it would be significant for Boulder City. Yeah. Okay, I think that covers that project. The last project, oops, I'd already gone there. The last project is project number 3, Power Supply Management Services Agreement. It was established in 2009. For the budget, every fiscal year, there is a cost projections from the participants that is submitted to each of the project participants. And under this agreement, there are 2 kind of service levels, if you will. The first one is load requirement service. And that purpose is to manage the load forecasting, resource forecasting, scheduling, tagging, optimization of resources, price risk management, kind of the full wholesale commodity requirements of a participant. And Boulder City and Southern Nevada Water Authority are the 2 participants in that agreement, and we have been for a number of years now. The other service schedule is much more limited. It's called Power Purchase and Sales Service, and it essentially just enables a project participant to buy or sell with SSEA a standard wholesale product of power if they wanted to do that. That's the only thing it includes. Lincoln County Power District and Overton Power District are participants in that project. And again, this is an ongoing agreement that it, you know, goes year to year. And yeah, is there a question?
Yeah, I had one question on that. Are we buying power or energy? Are we buying kilowatt hours or access to power?
You're buying energy. It's a full service wholesale commodity requirement.
Okay.
So, and I'll get into a little bit more of how it works here in a minute.
So question, and that basically provides everything above our hydro allocations? So that's,
yes.
We don't have to go anyplace else because you do it for us.
Yep.
That's good.
Okay. SSEA / SNWA provides service to SNWA members as well. And I wanted to just add this to kind of round out some of the participants in this. Southern Nevada Water Authority provides power to some of its member agencies for water and wastewater loads only. So it's a limited set. And the transmission delivery for that comes through the CRC. So there's a link into the Colorado River Commission as well. SSEA, as SNWA's power provider, includes those loads of its member agencies in its service to SNWA. So the participating member agencies are shown there on the screens: Las Vegas Valley Water District, City of Henderson, City of Las Vegas, Clark County Water Reclamation, and City of North Las Vegas all participate with portions of their load, their water and wastewater loads. And so the gist of that is that those loads are part of, SNWA provides those. So when SNWA goes to get power from Silver State Energy Association, all of those loads come with it. And so those participants, even though they're not participating directly through SSEA, they're participating indirectly through the Southern Nevada Water Authority. The governance of project number 3, I wanted to just cover a bit of that. There is an energy risk management policy that was approved by the board at the start of this project, and there have been energy risk procedures developed by the SSEA working group. The couple of the key parts of that is there's kind of a division of staff, if you will, between the front, middle, and back office. There are specific sets of products that are authorized, locations that can be bought or sold for power products, various lengths of term, et cetera. Specific credit limits are established through those procedures. Hedge guidelines are established and the horizon for those hedge guidelines, and there's a compliance plan in that. Those procedures have been around also since the inception, and there have been some minor modifications over the many years we've been doing this.
What's an example of risk? I mean, risk is a very general term. Do you have a specific example of energy risk?
Sure, and there are a lot. One simple one, I mentioned the credit risk matrix. If SSEA decides to buy power from a substandard or non-investment grade type of a counterparty, it could be exposed to some risk. If that counterparty went bankrupt before the delivery time, all of a sudden we thought we had energy, we don't, and now the market price has changed. Perhaps it's gone way up, and so we're exposed to that. That's one example.
So compliance, just to make, I don't know if this is a good time or not, is Boulder City still not trying to say it right, sorry. We still not part of NERC? I believe we're under since we're under the 100 megawatt system, didn't think we were under NERC, but I didn't know if this system had us involved with NERC. I thought that there was a NERC charge.
No, this, at least the project number 3 does not have any physical transmission assets that would change the status of Boulder City's NERC compliance, if you will.
Okay.
SSEA staff, I mentioned the division of labor, if you will. So the front office is the group that does the buying and selling of energy. The middle office does analysis, reporting, and risk monitoring. And the back office does all of the accounting and settlements, banking activities. Other support that is needed from time to time comes from SNWA or CRC staff, like some legal support and some IT support that is needed occasionally. And SSEA manages in this project all of the forward-looking or month ahead and longer type of activity. So we're buying products to manage our portfolio in that longer term look. Once we get down to the day-to-day in-the-month deliveries, we don't have the staff to operate a 24-hour a day in real-time operation. So we have agreements with Western Area Power Authority, who is our scheduling coordinator. They do the scheduling and tagging. They do all of our spot buying and selling on the hour. And they're also the balancing authority for all of our loads.
I'd like to point out, that's one of the advantages of using you guys and WAPA. If Boulder City had to take on those obligations, responsibilities, it would cost us a fortune. It would be very difficult to do for a small utility like this.
Meaning, how much do you mean by a fortune?
Millions. If we had to staff up to do scheduling and forecasting and the things that are real-time buying that WAPA, that Western does for us.
Future slide will talk about the overall overhead of the organization and how we share it all. That'll kind of demonstrate that point that he mentioned. Some of the benefits of SSEA, the economies of scale for just purchasing and for resource development, sharing overhead costs, which is exactly what we were just bringing up there. There's also load and resource portfolio diversification. So, with all the various entities, if each one of us had to not only staff appropriately to manage it, but then also to schedule and balance to each of those loads, rather than just doing one, it'd be a significantly more costly and difficult effort, of course. And so there's a certain minimal staff that has to exist to have a robust energy organization, and we have that. Once that's in place, adding some additional load and additional customers doesn't require any new staff. So the fact that we have more loads and more resources to share and more customers, that just helps us spread those overheads across many more organizations. There's also, of course, there's a broad community partnership in this. All of the entities participating are governmental type organizations, and this offers a public power option for those entities in Nevada.
Quickly on the scheduling and balancing, probably this can get pretty detailed, but Hoover A gives Boulder City a lot of power since we have energy and capacity, and we have a reasonable amount of capacity that should be able to help us in some of the balancing aspects. So is that something Boulder City still has, or is it something that sort of got blended in with all of the customers?
No, I'm going to go back. I think I may have missed or passed over one slide, but no, Boulder City has those hydropower resources. They're used exclusively for Boulder City. They get the benefit of them and the benefit of the, as you say, the extra capacity, which allows us to shape the energy to match the hours that are needed, and that is a valuable tool.
Yeah, because when some of the data I have seen, so I don't mean to take a lot of time up tonight because it's not necessarily part of it, but we have imbalance. It seems to be there's a large amount of imbalanced power that's bought for Boulder City. It seems to be that power is bought and then sold. And so it's balancing and imbalancing power that I see. And seems like with Hoover, we wouldn't need as much of that, but we have to use the capacity and capacity to get the energy, but I didn't know. But the large amount of it, at one point I'm seeing that we buy more power than Boulder City even needs. So if it's an imbalancing aspect, that's one thing I guess I'll have to do is maybe there's a workshop one of these days I can get a better understanding. Being in the government side, we didn't deal with that as much as the city would deal with it.
Sure. Well, and just to address it really briefly, of course, we have to forecast how much hydropower is going to be available for the month upcoming as well. And then we have to forecast what the load is going to be as well. And then we're buying, when we purchase commodity in the wholesale markets, we buy that in bulk block products, if you will, instead of hourly shaped, exactly refined for the load shape of Boulder City. So we buy these blocks of energy. When you get to the hour by hour, your balancing authority, WAPA, ends up selling some hours to fine tune the product basically, and in some hours has to buy some as you're selling back and forth. And obviously our forecasting isn't 100% perfect. And so sometimes we forecast a little low, weather turns out to be a lot hotter than we thought. Those type of things always create, some months we're selling more in the imbalance market, some we're buying more in the imbalance market. And doing that isn't necessarily a bad thing, if you will. Sometimes the price is higher and it turns out better for us. Sometimes it turns out worse, but we try to forecast our best and supply the needs as close as we can.
Do you check the accuracy of your forecasts? Like you go, okay, last year we said, how accurate are you at forecasting?
Yeah, we are. And I mean, generally, I think we do a reasonably good job, and we try to, and we allow Boulder City, we try to get Boulder City to input as well. So we basically take historical data, use that to project out the future year.
The demand we're talking about of energy, is that what you're forecasting, or the cost?
The energy.
The energy.
Well, yeah. So the energy amount, and then we turn it over to Boulder City to review and look at, and if there's any upcoming things that we might not know about, a new, any new loads or something that we just wouldn't know, then they weigh in on factors that might adjust that a little bit.
But like 1% accuracy, 20, 30%?
I'd say typically within 5%.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. And I'm going to turn the baton over to Gail Bates now.
So before...
Push your button. Sure.
That's better. So before we talk about dollars and cents, I thought it would be instructive to first talk about Boulder City's resource mix. And this won't come as a surprise to anybody, but of course, most of Boulder City's resource mix is comprised of hydropower. So I provided some statistics on for this past fiscal year end closing. So this is the period between July 1st of 2018 through June 30th of 2019. And during that time period, about 59,000 megawatt hours was supplied to Boulder City for Hoover A. Hoover B comprised another 13,000 megawatt hours. And then Boulder City also has an allocation of the Salt Lake City area integrated projects. And that comprised another 23,000 megawatt hours of hydropower. And then, of course, the balance is made up by the market purchases that are supplied by SSEA.
And I was just going to point out the numbers somehow on two of those didn't pull up. You see, they show values.
They didn't?
Yeah. So, yeah, I was just going to point out, maybe you noticed, that, for some reason, the presentation had numbers in and it's pulled up. Two of the numbers are not showing. They've got values, but we'll leave you a hard copy after we're done, so you've got those. In fact, your hard copies, does it show the numbers?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
It does.
Numbers on the slide too.
This is value.
But that's okay. Anyway, moving on to a little bit, few more discussion points on federal hydropower. That's the wrong way. There we go. So federal hydropower costs comprise about 41% of Boulder City's total cost to wholesale power. And of course, Boulder City has a contract for Hoover A directly with Western Area Power Administration. And then two of the contracts are through the Colorado River Commission for Hoover B and for Salt Lake City area integrated projects, otherwise known as SLIP. And CRC passes through these costs to Boulder City dollar for dollar, with the exception of we have a small administrative adder that we include in the cost to recover administrative expenses.
Now, so all the payment goes through Silver State? Because we're paying Silver State even for Hoover's contract, for Hoover A.
Yes, that's correct. So what we did to facilitate billing for all of the power customers that we're serving is to sort of funnel everything through one organization. Otherwise, you would be getting bills from the CRC, bills from the SSEA, bills from a myriad of different places. So just to make things simplified, we made SSEA the single billing agent for everything.
Okay, yeah, it looked that way, but
yeah.
some of the comments here and there sounds like there's still bills from CRC and stuff like that. But the bills are through
the
Okay.
SSEA.
And
Yes, that's correct.
we see the backup information, but we only get one invoice, which is really nice.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm just making sure I understand correctly. Thank you.
Yeah.
I had one quick, so if I look at, are we on Hoover A yet? Hoover A cost to Boulder City, or am I jumping ahead?
We're getting there. That's the next slide. There it is. So moving on to the Hoover A cost to Boulder City. For the last fiscal year, the delivered cost is about $21 a megawatt hour. And the majority of the Hoover A costs are really comprised of base charges, which are simply the costs for the Bureau of Reclamation to operate and maintain the plant. So the Bureau comes up with a budget every year. They tell us what our base charges are going to be, and we allocate those among all of the Hoover customers. So this is Boulder City's allocation of just of O&M costs, basically.
And in that, Boulder City gets a percentage share of the output of Hoover, I assume, so that
Correct.
we split that between all, because there's only so much every month that's available, capacity and energy, and so we have to share that.
Yes,
proportionally.
it's proportional among all customers who have an allocation of Hoover. Yes, that's correct.
I had one question regarding, so let's say one of these dams stops producing electricity entirely, but we have 30 to 50-year contracts. How much do we owe if we're not, what would be our yearly charge if we're not getting any electricity?
So the costs to be a participant in Hoover are essentially fixed. So you are committing to pay for the cost to operate the dam. Now, there are provisions in the federal Hoover contract that provide for discussions to occur if, in fact, there is no generation. And so there are contract openers, because if we don't have generation, we have a much bigger problem than just, the CRC's allocation. We have customers in California, Arizona, who are also participants in Hoover, and we all have the same dilemma we have to resolve.
But you're telling me we don't know. That's kind of surprising.
There are no guarantees in terms of how much generation will come out of Hoover.
No, I perfectly understand that.
Yeah.
But what I'm asking you specifically is, if it's zero, how much do we have to pay? And you're saying we don't know.
We're saying, right, we are saying that you're basically obligated to provide whatever costs the Bureau is spending on the plant.
Is there any arbitration? Let's say they want, $100 million, and we say, well, we disagree. Is there any mechanism for going back and forth?
That's essentially part of the contract. The contract opener says if that were to occur, we're going to sit down and have a conversation with the Bureau about what they're spending on the plant and how much the contractors are going to be obligated to come up with.
Okay.
Can I help with that, Gail? Or?
Yes, please.
Okay. Since I used to work with the Bureau of Reclamation, just to help with it, I think the bottom line is you're exactly right in that we have the opener, in that we can start discussions. There are several problems that occur so once the water gets below, let's say if it gets below, so we will try not, hopefully it won't, if it does go below the intake towers, then we could be, I guess you could say we could be on the hook for the full cost of the plant. The power recipients, make sure everybody understands, we're the paycheck. I mean, we're the checkbook. So we pay for everything. So whether it's running with water or not, we have to pay for everything. So hopefully there could be discussions to minimize that. But at one point, it was even brought up that if you didn't have any water running through the penstock, that would be a perfect time to do a lot of maintenance. So the maintenance costs could even be higher, and maybe there'd be something that could be lower. Just, I don't mean to be, the sky is falling, but if you want to say we don't know, we do know the worst case scenario is you're looking at the full cost. That's your worst case scenario.
And in addition to that, and I know this isn't in discussion for tonight, even though we have a water authority person here, but that is where the drought contingency plan that was recently approved also helps to try and avoid that condition occurring. Clearly that would have to be addressed in the future if something like that was going to occur, because it's both a water and power combined issue.
Are we still, is the Colorado River Authority still talking to LADWP on pump storage?
The conversation with pump storage seems to come up at almost every, Hoover ENOC committee meeting, where LA basically comes and gives us an overview of where they're at in the process. It seems to be a very slow-moving process. There's a lot of work to be done to see that come to fruition, but they have come in to talk to us. And if the time is ripe and there's a viable project, it's entirely possible we'll come back to the customer base and solicit interest in participating in it.
But Dennis, the last thing is, Dennis, you're exactly right. The one thing that everybody's seen that I was understanding before I retired is that now the energy and water groups are talking together, where before they weren't really talking. It was like water goes, we're going to get our water no matter what, and leave us alone, is what sort of I heard. And I think now that everybody's doing it. So it is looking more positive than it had in the past.
Yeah, I think the drought contingency plan will go a long way toward preserving hydropower generation. That is, in fact, what it's intended to do, is preserve the reservoir levels. And in doing that, you protect the hydropower generation. So that plan runs through 2026, and then beyond it, there will be another plan. So I think there is, I agree with that statement. There's a lot of discussion among the water managers on the river to manage the drought.
I'm a bit skeptical about the drought contingency plan because the evaporation rate from Lake Mead I don't think is known to better than a factor 2, which is a much smaller number than the cuts from the drought contingency plan. So the drought contingency plan is essentially compensating for an error, an underestimate of the evaporation rate from the lake. And I think, yeah, it sounds good, drought. First of all, even the name is crazy because it's not a contingency. We're in a drought, the largest drought in the 1,200-year history of the Colorado River, if you look at the tree ring data. So it's not a contingency in the event. We're in an event that's the deepest or second deepest on record. So I think I have less confidence than you do in the drought contingency plan, but that's a statement about the future. Either you're right or I'm right. We'll see.
Clearly, it's a concern of everyone's. We want to make sure we preserve generation, obviously. So, read. Moving on to, let's see. So Hoover A, we can talk about all these elements, or we can come back if you want to get more in depth about them. I just wanted to point out that the base charges are by far the highest percentage of the total cost of your Hoover allocation.
Again, is that charge then for the electricity itself, or what is the definition of base charge?
It's a fixed charge that we allocate every year. So we get a budget from the federal government and we allocate it among all of the customers. So it's essentially, it's basically at the beginning of every year, we know what your base charges are going to be from month to month. They're just spread out over the 12-month period. But they are a fixed cost. They're not variable with the amount of generation. We provide you with a schedule of base charges every year, is the simple answer.
Yeah. Well, then to complicate it, the thing to remember is that it's 50-50, 50% energy, 50%. So the base charge is broken into 50% for energy, 50% for capacity. The capacity is a monthly charge divided by 12. The energy, though, they try to work the energy out with shape it somewhat. So at least you're paying close to what you're getting. So there is some break there.
Well, then too, the base charge, the dam was paid off after the first 50 years, and then uprates and things like that. There were some additional charges, but they're basically paying for the operation of the dam, the employees and the people that do the job, because the infrastructure is basically paid for except additions.
Yep.
And so that's what we're paying for, is just operating it.
So Hoover B is a little bit more expensive. Hoover B delivered cost for fiscal 2019 was at $27.86 a megawatt hour, and I'm glad you gave me that segue onto how base charges are developed, because it helps explain a little bit about why Hoover B is a little more expensive than Hoover A. Essentially, Hoover B was the allocation that came out of the uprating in the late 1980s, and the ratio of capacity to energy is different for B than it is to A. So with the B customers got a larger allocation of capacity, but they got a lower allocation of energy. And as a result, it tends to increase the charges on a $1 per megawatt hour basis. The other thing that's slightly different about B is because it comes through the CRC, there is a small CRC administrative charge to recover operating expenses.
So by capacity, you mean the power that they can deliver at any given time over, say, an hour?
Correct.
So what's that number for that Hoover B then?
That is a good, I did not bring your allocations with me.
It used to be 8.5 megawatts, but I don't know if I think after the new contracts, it may be a little less than that.
The A allocation is 20.
That's even been reduced a little bit, I think. But
I think you're in the ballpark. I just don't have the exact, number.
We're talking capacity, right? Yeah, so remember,
it was 8.5 megawatts originally.
Yeah, so what happened is the capacity stayed the same. They took the 5% from the energy.
Okay.
So we still have the 20. I know we have the 20, and I believe we probably still have the 8.5. But what they did is, and one way to do that is they took the 2074 and spread it around everyone. So before we didn't have the 2074 because Western had a certain, they only obligated so much capacity. And the new contract they obligated, that's how everybody was able to maintain their amount.
So the 20 refers to Hoover A, is that right? Or-
Yes. And then there's another, we'll go with eight or so of Hoover B.
And the reason Hoover B has more capacity, even though the actual figure is smaller, is because it's a ratio of capacity to energy, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
So with B, you got a higher ratio of capacity, which gives customers the flexibility to shape the product, but you got a lower amount of energy with that allocation. So it is a little bit more costly than the A allocation. And then finally, you also have an allocation of SLIP. SLIP is a completely different product than Hoover is. SLIP is actually a firm product. So whatever you're contractually, whatever you get, there's a contractual minimum that you are entitled to receive with SLIP called, we refer to that as the sustainable hydropower. So at least that much will come out of the SLIP project. And then if additional is available, that's characterized as available hydropower. What's interesting about SLIP though is what you actually get is a blend in some years of hydropower generation and purchased power. So that has a tendency to influence the pricing of SLIP, as well as the fact that SLIP is a very environmentally sensitive project, and the operation is it's completely different. So, but it is the most expensive of the resources at $36.13 a megawatt hour is what the delivered cost was this past fiscal year.
Now, is that still based on a rate though? So we pay the rate and not a base charge for that?
Yes, so SLIP has a rate, a capacity and energy rate, and the rate is held the same over a 5-year period.
It's held the same over 5 days?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So we're in the middle of an upcoming rate period.
Okay.
And the rate is projected to stay about the same. So, but yes, it's structured considerably different than the way Hoover is.
Yeah, I didn't know if they changed it or not. That's what I thought I'd make sure. Thank you.
You're saying it's a mix of hydro and natural gas, or what's the other source?
It's a mix it's just purchase power from the market. It can be a mix.
Because that could become an issue with Nevada, where we're trying to get 50% of our energy from renewables, and then if we're already at, I don't know, that could affect that legal requirement maybe if this stuff is coming from fossil fuel sources. Or not, I don't know.
I can tell you it won't affect Boulder City directly at all. Because we also got the rider in the legislation of up to 1 million megawatt hours before we even have to start reporting or have to beat the 50% requirement, which we already basically meet. So
1 million megawatt hours of what?
Of energy demand. So what I'm saying is, we're not, as a city of Boulder City, we've got a long way to go before we're even required to meet the 50%.
So there's some.
And we're already there anyway, so.
There's some, do you want to talk about the SB 358?
Well, I was just chiming into your, Dennis. Boulder City's total load requirements in a year are around 160,000 megawatt hours. Right. And as he said, up to 1 million, you have a exemption, if you will, from reporting and meeting that obligation.
Wow, that's strange. On what grounds did they do that? Or?
Good legislating.
Are there any? That's okay.
That was basically part of the legislation that was provided to the municipal and the cooperatives, the not-for-profits.
Wow. Okay, thanks. Yeah,
so it's a little different than NV Energy as an example.
What I was going to comment is NV Energy and the people that are being pushed by the SB or for-profit corporations. If you're in a municipality, you can have a different set of rules and regs. And we are in a municipality. So we're not for profit.
No, okay, sure, that's useful. On the other hand, I think the whole thing was driven by climate change and the laws of physics, which are not governed by whether you're a municipality or whether you're a non-municipality, but by the fact, but the drought that you're witnessing is because of the warming, and as the National Climate Assessment said. But anyway, that's another issue.
But with Nevada Energy's base load being covered by natural gas, they have to get the natural gas plants offline because that is not green energy. Right. We have hydro. So depending on how dirty the hydro plant is, because when I used to work for the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, we got gigged because they had oil leaking into one of their hydro plants from a bad turbine. Then once they fixed it, they were able to call that hydropower green energy again because they had no sheen on the water. That's how they fixed it.
My point is that Hoover A and B is less than 50% of our power consumption. It's a moot point if it's irrelevant because of the law anyway, so I'll skip that.
But I just want to make sure that I understand. Somebody said that Nevada's legislation, because Hoover was not considered renewable power, because the United States did not consider anything larger than a 30 megawatt plant renewable.
That changed with SB 358.
Okay, that's what
So,
you're.
yeah,
That's
so
why I just wanna
hydropower is now considered renewable in the state of Nevada.
In Nevada. No,
Yeah.
So the nation hasn't done it yet, but Nevada is so Hoover.
We're
I'm
on
sorry,
the cutting edge.
Hoover is and so Hoover and SLIP would both, because neither one of them would have been before.
That's correct. Yeah,
And
this
so-
is brand new with SB
And that was
358.
a big part of that that 358 legislation was getting that
But it
defined
is,
as hydro, as renewable.
but it is not relevant in Boulder City's case, but if that were to ever change, yes, there's a significant amount of your mix that's hydropower, and it would be considered renewable.
Right. Well, I think it is relevant. I hear what you're saying, but as long as we understand that, because before somebody could say that everybody thought Hoover was renewable, and so we thought wouldn't be in trouble. So without the extended municipality language and stuff like that, we could have been in trouble in Boulder City if Hoover was not considered renewable, because we wouldn't have had any green. It depends on how they looked at it. So
If the law were written differently, yes, and you were subject to it.
right. So I think it just helps the citizens, myself included, understand that there's no problem because all of the hydro load is considered renewable.
Yes.
Thank you.
The point is, it's less than 50% of our electricity, Hoover. So if we're going back to saying what if, then if we went back to the rules that apply to other people, less than 50% of our electricity would be coming from hydro, because you're saying the Salt Lake guys can buy stuff from natural gas or other sources.
It's a small percentage of the mix, though.
That was my question.
And so purchase power is not a huge component of the product. What our federal contract with SLIP says is you get 1 megawatt of renewable attribute for every megawatt hour of energy produced. So from our perspective, it's a green resource too.
It's basically just firming energy, isn't it?
That's exactly
Yeah.
what it is.
Energy, it fills up the bucket.
Okay, so here's our best projection as of right now of what hydropower looks like cost-wise. We talked a little bit about the drought contingency plan. The drought contingency plan, as it's modeled, does have the impact of reducing hydropower generation for the first few years of the DCP. So while we are conserving and keeping water in Lake Mead, there's less hydropower available because less water is flowing through the turbines to the thirsty Californians. So there is a projected decrease in hydropower, which puts upward pressure on costs per megawatt hour. And then there's sort of a leveling off effect as a result of the DCP. And once again, these are all, they're all premised on models that are run by the Bureau in Western. So we're projecting some mild upward pressure on costs, not within a huge range of variation though.
I have one question on these models also. I never see any uncertainties. So if we don't know what the errors are in these projections, like by how much your models vary, it's kind of hopeless. It's like, well, you know, it could be $100, it could be $0. What are the uncertainties on that graph that you showed us?
I don't know for certain which series of traces or which traces were selected for this, but I could get you that information. There are a number of different cases that are run, and this is some percentile of those traces. So there are various different hydrology scenarios, though, that are looked at when these projections are developed.
Right, so the key is how you select those. You know, you can run 1,000 models, and then, you know, how do you in fact select the mix of models that then contributes to that uncertainty?
Yes.
And it does matter because the BOR projections were actually incorrect. If you look at the 2012 supply and demand study for the Colorado River and you look where we're at now relative to what they predicted, it's completely wrong.
Absolutely.
It's outside their error bounds. So it actually is important, I think.
Absolutely. It's this is forecasting, of course, is not an exact science. The Bureau and Western do their best to run the models, run various scenarios, and then select the result that they feel is going to be most representative. But I agree, there are some traces that are going to be worse, and there are some traces that are going to be better in terms of hydrology.
But I think it's absolutely critical. I mean, you know, if you were talking about your own retirement package and you said, well, the stock market goes up, you know, 10% a year, what's the problem? Well, what matters is how much it fluctuates. Because if it goes down 30% in 1 year and then it stays down, and so the error, I'm not picking on you. Whenever I see these graphs, there's never any errors.
Understood.
And I think that's a fatal error in itself. Because if we can't estimate the uncertainties, these graphs are essentially meaningless. Yeah.
Well, usually what they would do, but it's confusing facts too, because a lot of times Bureau will do a 90 percentile or a 10 percentile. So if you want to look at an error, but then those are extremes. Mm-hmm. And so you can't really, it's hard to base on that. So most of theirs is done, I'm trying to remember if it's a median or a median, median, I believe it's done on. And so they try to throw out some of the extremes.
But it's the extremes that matter. If all that mattered was the median, I've run the Colorado River many times, 30 times in white water. If you said, well, the median drop of the Colorado River is 9 feet a mile, you wouldn't tie anything into your boat. But then you hit lava falls and you're in your underpants swirling around off the shelf because you ignored the extremes. The extremes are what's going to get you. So actually, that's what matters. We're now in an extreme event that's never been seen in the last 1,200 years. So that's what's fatal, is looking at the median. When you're playing Russian roulette, it's not the average outcome that matters. So statistics are really important in this game. That's my science. I don't want to give you a lecture here, but it really does matter.
Well, we certainly can run, I mean, if Boulder City was interested in studying those extremes, we certainly have the data to be able to drop in more pessimistic traces and provide you with a whole new picture of what the very worst case or the very best case would look like.
To not extend this, is it possible to talk to you guys offline? Because I'm quite interested in this. Are you
Absolutely.
guys available to discuss? Okay, because I don't want to torture these guys further with this. Thank you.
Their hourly rate is pretty high, though, so you know.
Okay, moving on to wholesale market costs. So this is just a snapshot of wholesale market costs, and I've kind of divided this up into term purchases, which are the majority of the purchases that we do. And then we have the day ahead and hourly purchases, which is more or less known as balancing. And then we have some after the fact energy costs that we incur in the imbalance market. So 3 different sub-markets, I guess, if you will, to come up with total energy costs. And for fiscal 19, we averaged $48.18 a megawatt hour. The term purchases are the least expensive, and the day ahead hourly, the next most expensive, and the imbalance, which are after the fact costs, are the most expensive piece. But they're also the smallest part of your portfolio. So on a $1 per megawatt hour basis, they're expensive, but the volumes are very small, stated another way.
So the term, I think in one case you were showing long-term sales. What is the term, what's the long-term, are we talking 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? What's the purchasing of the energy nowadays?
The purchasing horizon is a rolling 5-year hedge. So, for example, we're getting ready to go into our next forecasting period, and we'll be purchasing energy for the 5th year out. Everything else has been already purchased. So it's a 5-year hedge. Okay, other costs. We have some transmission and ancillary service costs that we pay to WAPA. We are in WAPA's balancing area, so we have to pay for a share of those costs. Scott mentioned this earlier, but we also incur some scheduling costs for them to manage the load on a real-time basis. Since we're not a 24-hour shop, somebody else has to be, and we've contracted with Western. We have some SSEA administrative costs, and I've got another slide that delves into that a little bit more. And then the regulatory assessments, which were also mentioned earlier. Even though Boulder City doesn't have NERC compliance responsibilities, Western Area Power Administration does. And so this is a pass-through of their costs to their balancing area customers. Fortunately, they're not very large. So looking a little bit more at SSEA labor and operating costs, Scott mentioned this earlier, SSEA doesn't have any employees. We're staffed by 5 SNWA employees and 8 CRC employees. The total labor and operating costs for the whole group are $2.5 million. And right now we share those among the 9 entities that Scott had up on the board earlier. That would be SNWA, all of its member agencies, and Boulder City. So those costs are shared, and they're shared, the majority of them are shared in proportion to load. So SNWA right now actually pays about 65% of the total labor and operating costs. And this is just a graphic which shows who's paying for those costs, with Boulder City's share being $311,000. So if we put this all in a blender, all commodity costs, all other costs, including labor, for fiscal 19, the delivered cost of wholesale power for Boulder City was $37.27 a megawatt hour. And if you want to know where that's going, well, fortunately, it's not going up. It's projected to go down somewhat in the next couple of years. But for the most part, Boulder City's wholesale power costs are projected to remain relatively stable. Someplace between $30 and $35 a megawatt hour. We don't see that changing dramatically one way or the other.
Is that, probably the hydro's not going to go down, but is it just the other costs that are projected to go down? Is there a reason for that, or is it just, it's curious, it's just interesting?
Wholesale market costs have generally trended down while hydropower has generally ticked up a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so what you're seeing is the effect of the lower market power costs bringing the whole average down.
Is it because of the reduced cost of the solar that's coming online, or the gas plants that are aging and getting cheaper or being paid off, or?
It's mostly been driven by natural gas prices. And over actually many years, if you saw on the graph there, and we only show the last 3 years, I think, but even extending beyond that, natural gas prices have been falling for a, multi-year, quite a few year period now. You do see at the end of that out 3 and 4 years where finally that kind of bottoms out and we start seeing prices finally start to actually increase just a little bit.
I think that's it.
Well, thank you very much for coming and presenting it, and thank you for sitting through our questions and accepting all our interruptions.
We're happy to do it. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
You're invited and welcome to stay if you'd like, unless you want to go watch the hockey game. So.
Sorry. So the next agenda item then is, so for possible action, review of the fiscal year 2021 capital improvement program. And I believe, Dennis, you're going to be leading us in this.
Yes, thank you, Holly. And I know a lot of you have either attended or seen a lot of this information already because we're in the same kind of schedule as the city with the city CIP planning and presentation process. So, but I thought it was important because you've seen the FY20 that we've presented previously. But I thought we'd just go ahead and go through the FY21 projects. And then I also handed out the project list, so we can talk about that a little bit after we get through the presentation. Obviously, you guys know what the CI program is for and what it's meant to do. And clearly, you know, when we define and develop and define these projects, we also have to figure out a way to coordinate the financing and, you know, how we're going to pay for them and what the priority and timing of them is. The funding is annually appropriated. It coincides with the city budget process. This one's kind of an interesting and new to me. The capital project, as defined in Boulder City, is any sort of infrastructure project with a minimum life expectancy of 5 years and the minimum cost of $25,000. So it's a little bit lower as far as what I'm used to, but that's how we define it here.
No, okay, so you're saying with minimum life, not maximum.
Yeah, minimum.
Minimum life.
And again, I've come from larger utilities where the minimum is quite a bit higher than that. So it's something I'll have to get used to. But as long as we know what the definition is, it doesn't matter too much.
So now, the vehicle program that's being currently being developed, so that takes all the vehicles that are expected to be less than 5 years and less than 25 million?
Well, and the majority of the vehicles are going to be more than 5 years. So the way that's set up in the vehicle replacement program is they do look at, of course, age. They look at miles. They look at how much maintenance is being done. It's a prioritization process. But those vehicles all are considered capital assets.
But will they be taken as a separate item and not included?
So going forward, what you'll see in the FY20, and I can't remember what the number is. We might show it in here, but going forward with the creation of the replacement program, the enterprise fund will be projecting what its future expenses are going to be with regards to vehicle and equipment. Vehicle replacement will be putting money into that fund so it's there and ready for when we need it.
So it'll be another cost that we can see separate. It'll be separated and be a little bit easier to see.
Yeah, you'll see it. Yeah, it'll look different going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Oh. Not sure what's happening with that slide, but just real quick on the electric side, the biggest project we have going into FY21 is essentially the completion, if you will, of the BC tap to Buchanan overhead line. It's the second year of the project funding. That's to go from the BC tap all the way, along that 69 kV corridor all the way to Buchanan. We did increase that cost just because the sole fact that what was in the CIP originally was what was in the CIP. Frankly, we weren't entirely sure that it included all the soft costs, so we did increase that total cost for that total project.
Has that been bid out, or is it in the works, or still planning?
So that was going to be a part of my director's update, but I can give it right now since we're talking about it, and that's just as easy. So we put it out to bid as a design build. We only received one bidder. Per the Nevada revised statutes with that type of design and construction project, you actually have to have two bids It's back out on the street now, and pardon me, we're also looking at some other alternatives potentially to get that work done.
In order to tie that Boulder City tap into the Boulder City Loop project, I'm recommending that we split that job into two pieces, Boulder City tap to Substation 3, and then Substation 3 back over to Buchanan for the upgrade. That would allow us to do a full load test or a pretty healthy load test on that new 100 MVA transformer. Without that link between Boulder City tap and Substation 3, we're not going to have any luck.
I had one comment for ignorant guys like me. It might be useful to have like a map, because I'm never quite sure what you guys are talking about. So I don't know if at some point.
I totally agree with you. Even with me as the new guy, we're going to be talking about some future meetings coming up as part of your agenda item. And I do intend on going over what I call it the electrical system master plan. So we'll cover the 5-year projects and show you where they are, and it definitely makes it a lot clearer, yeah, even for me.
Due to potential of sabotage and other things, those maps are not on public.
Correct. So
they cannot be issued to the public. They cannot be distributed.
That is correct. So we will not be presenting them, and they won't be part of the package, if you will.
Or just a rough sketch, so that if I did want to blow up the system, I wouldn't
the committee
know.
itself, we can have on a hardboard map, and
Yeah, something like that, just so I can have an image in my head. Yeah, thank you.
But the actually federal land, I believe it's both federal and state law. I know it's state law for sure. We can't do that. So anyway, that's the BC tap.
Well, Dennis, I guess since this is possible action, so I guess we can look at towards the end, but maybe we need to understand, try and get the feel for this meeting's concept better.
Schedule.
Yeah, you're looking at approval by November 11th, if I'm understanding. Is that November?
So
no, that's us.
Yeah,
adopted by November 12th.
Correct. So when we get to this, I was going to cover that a little bit.
Okay,
the intention there.
Because whether we need a motion to go for the city council that this committee would suggest that they get split in half for the coming year would be something I guess I need to understand. How much? It doesn't look like we have a whole lot of time to do that.
Well, we would, what I guess staff would hope for, if you will, is a recommendation at the November 6th meeting for, to move forward to city council for adoption of the FY21.
Right, and right now Greg has indicated a preference, and I guess that's why I got to figure out if that's something we would do at the 6th, or if we would do. He's got a saying he'd prefer to see the TAPS, that $5 million or project itself, split in half instead of one full project going forward. Am I misrepresenting you?
No, it's.
Oh no, I think you're talking about as far as phasing the project.
The biggest problem I have, if we take this all in one chunk, we're talking 2 years out to get this project done, developed, and in service. If we wait 2 years, we cannot power up the Boulder City tap transformer to even 50 or 70 MVA. We can backfeed down into Meade sub, and they could pick a burden up out of the 230 kV line that transformer is going to come off of, 69 kV, and go back into the switch station at 69 kV, and they could put a burden on that 69 kV to where we could load that bank. Right now, the problem we have is the conductors that are overhead from the Boulder City tap to Substation 3 are only rated 50 MVA. We have a 100 MVA transformer we have to test. We can't do it with 50 MVA wire.
So you're talking about doing that portion first?
Yeah, that
Yeah,
has
no,
to,
I understand that.
and then when we do the other leg that we're talking about going down Nevada Way, that the material is supposed to be coming into the town pretty quick, that when we get that other circuit, we've got two sources we can tap off of Substation 3 to load that bank. We can ship it from down to Substation 3, Substation 2, and into the Buchanan circuit going down to Meade, and then we could pick up the other half of the town with the new loop that we're building.
And I think I understand what you're saying, and I think if we know that we have the project fully funded, then we can phase it however makes the most sense.
Yeah, and the other thing we got, which is something that I know Ned knows about and some other people, is we've got to look at our protective scheme to protect that transformer at 69 kV from the town. And one of the key things we don't have is fiber optic cable from Boulder City tap to substation 3 and then to the other more modern substations we have in town, and we're going to get in a world of hurt if we don't get that completed.
And so just so you know, we are talking now with, looking at what upgrades to the SCADA system and the fire, it might come into play in discussions on what we could do in the FY21. We'd have to amend it in the spring once we know what that number is, but we are taking a hard look at that.
I think I would put a placeholder in this capital project line item for that. In other words, just in case to where we don't have to come back and amend the capital project in 2021.
So this kind of goes to the discussion in whole as far as the 21. Because we're in the middle of doing some studies, my sense is and my feel is that we're going to be amending FY21 potentially anyway in the spring. And that was part of the kind of the future discussion on the other agenda item, but I see that happening anyway. So it can go one way or the other, but if the committee would prefer we put it in now, that's certainly okay with staff. Probably preferential.
Well, I guess, so depending on, a suggestion would be to help speed things up since we've sort of sidetracked things here. And I think a lot of the stuff we're going to is the future, trying to figure out what is being done, what are the priorities and what has to be done. Do we need to go over the projects or can we skip that to get to the meat of the issue?
That's your choice.
No, it's,
If
I'm thinking if everybody else is, do people want to hear what is the projects? You've broken them out a little bit more than what we've heard before, but not much more.
yeah, they're broken down and then the project sheets are attached.
Right.
Certainly if you...
Will you talk to your mic more?
Oh,
Larry, pull your mic towards you more? Yeah, thank you. That'll help.
yeah, it's at your, if you guys would want to expedite this presentation, it's certainly attached and you can follow up with any questions you have.
Well, I'm suggesting, I just want to make sure that the colleagues are, don't want to go against what the committee might want to do. So, George, is that something, do you have questions on the actual, so we've got about 5, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, several slides, and we've sidetracked you to, and I think more of the meat of it is what's currently some of the stuff you handed out now, because part of it, if I'm understanding too, is what we do in 21 is do we have time to even do those? Are we going to get the other ones done? And I think that's sort of what, if I'm understanding Greg too, we've got to get the other projects before we can even get to these. So if we talk about what's currently going on and stuff like that, then this is sort of more of a background and maybe even talk about it more on the 6th. But I'm thinking just to speed things up, we can avoid the section. I guess it'd be, we could avoid all. Does anybody want to go through the water? And so we could almost skip ahead to, I guess your new aspect, what you handed out.
Just real quick, I do want to say we've shown $300,000 for perimeter fencing and maintenance road design in the F21 CIP for the landfill. That really kind of sort of is a placeholder just because we're taking a look at that. We did want to get it in the CIP just in case, but I think there's some other options there that we may be able to actually push that out without any risk or anything else associated with it. It's just, is it necessary as FY21? And we're going to be talking to the county about that. So.
Yeah, because I think
It really is a placeholder.
Okay.
At this point.
That's good, because I think what we're looking at is, I guess what I was trying to get to, and since we're taking some of the time up in that, we're gonna run pretty far over to get everything else in, is that whether we need a motion to go to the city council. And I think that's what, I'm not in the mindset to do it for tonight, but whether
No,
we have
and
to
I
be.
wasn't anticipating that.
But whether we have to
either.
be prepared to go for the next meeting, because I think what Greg is suggesting would be something that might be different than as part of the original scheme. So it would be a motion that we would suggest something different to the city council. Am I misunderstanding, Greg?
What I'm looking at right now is that in the wastewater projects, we have a 2019 PLC SCADA upgrade that's already encumbered. It's ongoing and encumbered. If that is the same company or group that might be considered to be looking at the electrical SCADA upgrade, that might be a way to tie the two together. This here has already got a BC tap to Buchanan overhead line. It says starting, and it has a project number, and it has a placeholder for money. Rather than us trying to get $3,850,000 in this time period, that is what I would consider a placeholder for the total project of $9 million is what we were talking about. That's the approximate cost.
Right. So if I'm hearing you correct, what I think we could do is, if we get the CIP for the project approved, how we phase it is entirely up to us.
Right, but what I'm
As far
saying
as-
is we're not looking at trying to get $9 million in an account before we start the project. I'm saying if we take 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3 to get to the $9 million, we can do the first part of the project, which will complete the Boulder City tap to Substation 3, which is at the end of Adams and, I'm trying to remember that other road it's on,
He knows.
River Mountain, yeah. So that's where Substation 3 is, and that's our weakest link in this next project, because when the 69 kV overhead loop comes in to feed to Substation 6, which is down by Hemingway Park,
Right.
that will allow us more flexibility as to our second source of energy for Boulder City.
Yep. So yes, we can be more prepared to discuss that at the next meeting. And just as an aside to the SCADA side, we have asked that firm that's working on those SCADA upgrades to get a handle on what it would take to essentially complete what we think are necessary SCADA upgrades for the electrical system, beyond obviously a passive, which is basically what we have now. It would be more operational.
What's that acronym? Sorry, again,
I'm sorry. SCADA is the Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition System. So as an example, say Marvis is home on a Friday night, he gets an alarm, he can pull it up on he could, if we had everything in place that we would need to have in place, he could pull it up on his laptop, he could assess what the alarm is, he could throw a switch if he needed to, he could do potentially without even having to go out, at least to do some initial, to give them time to get out there. So, and that, frankly, most utilities are already at that stage. We're just not.
Now, Ned, are you going to be here next meeting?
Yes,
And Greg?
I will be.
And Greg, okay, because you two are the, thank you. Okay, Dennis.
Okay, we on to the next item?
Yeah, I guess, well, not the next agenda, because now it's to where you handed out the future proposed, and if you could explain your
future
handouts.
proposed. I just want to hand this out, and I don't necessarily want to spend a lot of time on tonight. What I wanted to let you know is we've been working diligently to essentially clean up what was presented at the previous meeting. There was a lot of overlap, double counting. There were projects that were shown in that list that were actually not a part of the PIC or CIP. They were operating funds that covered those projects. So we've been spending this poor guy sitting next to me has been basically going through all the records we can find, because part of the information is in project files, and then part of the information is in the financial system, and getting all that and reconciling that to the best, going backwards to the extent that we can. There's still some work to be done. I just wanted the committee to know, here it is for you to take a look at. You don't need to study it necessarily today unless you want to. We're just getting closer to being accurate with what, when these projects were funded, when they were, the timing of them, how much has been spent or how much was budgeted. In certain cases, we show where funding was reprogrammed to other places so that you can try to follow that money. An example being there was some funding reprogrammed to cover the BC Parkway that initially was for other projects, and so we've kind of footnoted that in here. That would be unless you dug into the council agendas, because we do have to go to city council when we reprogram those monies and move them from one project to another, and they all do go to council. Unfortunately, we don't have that in one single spreadsheet or database where it's easy for us to track going forward. More importantly, going forward, we will. So when this committee asks us questions going forward, it's a lot easier for us to pull up the data and give you an answer. And because a lot of it, or as an example, when we phase, the BC TAP is a perfect example. The project's been phased in many different phases, and getting those numbers to be accurate and understandable by the public is just something we need to get better at. I would say this is maybe 90% accurate. I think we've got the big projects mostly covered as far as accuracy goes, but we're going to keep scrubbing it. I would encourage you, obviously, to take a look at it. And then we can discuss it more on the 6th as well.
So I'm just trying to, this list is a list of projects that, I'm not sure what this list is. It's for the next 5 years?
No, this is, so we had been asked before if we could take a look at, because there's a good reason here. Projects were funded under certain CIP timeframes, and they were moved in certain cases. They were funded in 16, but we didn't get to them till 18, and how much was budgeted and how much was spent, and what is the timing of those projects. So we're just trying to get a handle on that history to make it as accurate as possible, because that's what we were asked for.
So we're not looking forward, or is there?
We are going to be looking forward, and we're going to be talking about that in your agenda item. So
this is the past, really?
This is really through FY20.
Okay.
And for good reason. The effort, I think, was important. We needed to be able to follow the money. We obviously need to know how much is sitting there ready to fund these projects and available to fund the projects, to make sure we have the available funding to cover them. They do take time in certain cases. We run into issues, and the 69 kV loop is a perfect example of a project that was awarded but had some issues and got moved out further than we would have liked it to. So anyway, that's what this is. We're going to keep working on it to make it essentially as accurate as possible. And I think that is important moving forward as well. We can know how much we have available and how that's going to impact future ability to fund projects as well. So.
Yeah, that's why the November 12th is a little bit worrisome, trying to get all the information, because basically understanding what is going to go forward into 2021, and I think that's what I'm hearing Greg saying too, is first off, are we going to have the money? Second off, do we have the time to do all the projects. So if we put too much in there, you're gonna have a large budget, but we're still never gonna get to everything. So is it more something that this committee could say, well, we recommend that you try to complete all these projects and then get the phase of the BC TAP, if I'm understanding Greg properly, that's major importance, but doing all 5 million of it is that, do we want it in the 2021 budget or try to split it up? Sounds like that project is, since it is such a large budget item, is a major,
Well, and
issue.
again, how and what year it gets funded in and how we just decide to phase it don't necessarily have to be exact. There's so many things that impact projects anyway. We're whether we clearly are going to spend 3.8 million and 20 and 5 million, and is really, it's the total project cost that's important. Oftentimes we phase them however makes the most sense, and if we change that phasing, the important thing, at least in my mind, is that we know we have the funding to do the entire project.
Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, though, with everything, the November 12th isn't a drop dead. We have plenty of meetings to discuss some of the, I guess I'm feeling we're behind the ball here and how much we have to do tonight and how much we have to do on the 6th.
I think there's some language that we can discuss and what that recommendation or motion would look like that would cover the committee as far as what a recommendation of council could be.
That would be something we discuss next week. Is that what I'm understanding?
At the 6th, yeah.
Yep, the next meeting, sorry, not next week, is that next meeting? Okay, then, right now then, to make sure I'm understanding too, taking a quick look at this sheet, in the electrical aspect, there's a lot of them that have a start date of 1/1/2020. So is it expected that they're gonna start in 20, or are you talking that they started in, fiscal year 20? It has to be 20. I'm just trying to make sure we're talking fiscal year.
So a lot of these,
actual
remember, for as an example, look at FY20. I'm just looking at water because it's easy there at the bottom of the list on water. It was just approved in July 1, right, for FY20. We're only in FY20 a few months. I mean, these projects are being defined, and so that when they say to be started, they're being defined. The scope of work's being defined. It's not likely they'll be completed in FY20. And in probably the majority of these cases, it's very rare that a project's totally completed the year that it's shown as being funded. They just don't work out it just doesn't work that way.
No, that part I understand. So I just want to make sure I'm looking at the numbers correctly and the dates correctly. So you've got fiscal year, so that's totally clear on the far right.
Yeah.
Your project, so basically though, it's more or less a projected project start.
Yes.
And a projected completed, because these 120s hasn't even happened yet. I just want to make sure I wasn't.
Yeah, and so in some of these where they're not as well defined as I would like them to be going into the fiscal year in the future. I'm hoping we're a lot better at that when we get the condition assessment work done. These will be defined further going into capital programs. We'll know what they are, be able to hit the ground running on July 1st. And even when you see them in the future, you'll know, okay, so a water main replacement program, those projects will be more defined. We'll be able to, the scope will be defined. And July 1st, we're running. Right now, we're in the middle of defining what those water main replacement programs are.
Okay.
No, and we're limited to the budget of what's in there.
Yeah. No, I'm just trying to, because this is helpful just as long as I understand the headings. Mm-hmm. And I understand.
Oh, I got you.
I understand headings too, because it's not always easy to make it totally clear.
Right.
But I just want to make sure that I'm understanding, because given it saying that, okay, you're projecting, for instance, the BC TAP increment overhead line, you're saying that you're projecting, it says project completed. So I'm saying if you put the word projected, then you're projecting that it's completed October 1st, 2021. And that's helpful. And I appreciate that. I just need to make sure I understood the dates right, and that wasn't a fiscal year.
Yeah.
And that the fiscal year is on the far right is what do it. So that's the actual year.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's helpful. And I think that's what's leading us into next meeting on the 6th, then we're saying, okay, looking at, so we can go back and study these, and we're saying, okay, you're gonna be doing a whole lot in 20. You're not sure that they're gonna be completed in 20. These are projections. And so, these won't even be completed before you start the fiscal. You'll be completing some of these about the same time you'll be starting the next fiscal year, if everything goes well.
If everything goes, yeah.
And so if we can talk about that next meeting, so that way we're saying, how many do you really expect to be pulling forward? And is it feasible to do all the projects that is being looked, because you're bringing quite a few forward still.
We are, and, it's a lot. I don't deny that at all. We have more staff than we've had in the past, and when I say that, like me, not that I can get into that detail, but I can help push and move along some of the projects that historically have been delayed. Clearly, in some cases, we rely on consultants to help get the work done.
So I've got a
But a lot of it on the public works side, the public works director is not here, but he has staff. You saw in last year's budget where we do have more in-house to be able to design these in-house, and a lot of these smaller ones are being done in-house and will be done in-house.
So that was the question I had. A lot of the work that you've got scheduled here, is that going to be done by in-house crews, or are you going to contract the sheriff? Or somewhere you'd have contractor put in conduit and junction boxes, but you could have our own crews.
We have, a lot of the feeder projects, those types of projects we're doing in-house. We may have some assistance with review on those. Ones that clearly that we have enough experience that we can do in-house, we'll keep in-house. The larger projects, just because of time, more than anything, and some of the expertise we'll farm out.
Okay.
Okay, anything, so I guess that, if we complete, if I'm understand correctly, okay, so you have the next, do we want to just go over the next steps, or have we gone it for that capital program? Did you want to just do the last 2 slides on that, or does everybody feel like we've covered the capital enough for this meeting?
I think so.
Okay.
We can beat it up more. Let's see what the last 2 slides are. Okay. Yes, we need new trash pump. Pictures. Yeah, so just real quick, and I think we can talk about it again at the next item, but the city schedule is for adoption of the CIP for the entire city, the enterprise funds and the general fund, on November 12th. And then they would incorporate that funding for those CIP projects into the 21 operating budget, which again, that doesn't kick off until early next year. So they all get integrated into the entire CIP and operating budget. And of course, it does eventually have to be submitted to the state by the end of next fiscal year.
Okay, let me just look at the, okay, so we have, see, 1, 2, 3, 4 more items to go through, just to make sure we don't need to move around a little bit. So, item number 4, discussing regarding goals and objectives of the utilities. That's a very important one. Then we have the utilities director update, discussion of the next agenda, and then the public comment. So I guess we just need to go in order, because we still want to at least touch base on all these items. So the next one then is the discussion regarding the goals and objectives of the Utility Advisory Committee. George, did you want to do some of start that?
Sure, I can do that. I think that might be worth having as an ongoing one, since we've only got 4 out of 7 people here. So again, preliminary. I guess we all have bees in our bonnet, but one thing I would like to see on this agenda item is the word timescale, tasks, and refer to the resolution, because at the end of the, you guys are all professionals in this business. I'm not, but as an outsider, it's, what we have to do is dictated by this resolution that was voted on by the council, which says, here's what we want you to do. One of them has to be completed once a year. The other ones are open, the review of the utilities. And I think it would be worth discussing when everyone's here, what do we mean by review? Do we mean this? And then we say we've reviewed it. Should we write a report? I think that's something that's worth discussing. Like, how do we interpret the resolution, and on what time scale do we want to complete these tasks as we see them? I don't know if I'm being too abstract, but that's how I see it. It's like we're answerable to the council. The council could come back and say, well, we made this resolution. What have you guys done? And we could say, well, we went through PowerPoints. We discussed things on these topics. But for me, it would be useful to produce reports to say, here's how we see the state of the electrical utility. Here's how we see the state of things. It doesn't have to be 500-page reports. It can be 1 page, 3 pages, I don't know. But that's sort of how I see it. So those are the words I'm hung up on. But I'd like to see that in the next agenda, because every time I put these words in, they get removed. Time scale, tasks and resolution. I think that's the kind of logic that I see to this thing. But so that's how I'd like to start it.
And I do want to apologize to George. I left the word timescale out, and he was pretty clear about that. And that was my bad. Given that, I did throw this document together, I think, as a discussion piece today, and I think it's a living document, because a lot of this is just my thoughts, and you as the committee might have some other thoughts. What I did, because I thought it was relevant to the timeline issue, is take kind of the city's capital and operating process just for FY21, because we're going through that now, and we'll be going through that. And I added what our normal first Wednesday of the month meetings would be, and clearly we knew what was on there for today. You can see that there. So the color, I don't know what color this is. I'm going to call it red. Is Utility Advisory Committee meetings, potential workshops, and what could be potential items of discussions. And then as we kind of work through this moving forward, we can even talk about essentially where staff sees where we might think it's a good time to move a resolution or actually a recommendation to council. The one that's coming up is the most obvious is the FY21 capital improvement plan. Because the city's in the middle of that process. Their intent is to get it completed, or at least adopted, on November 12th at the city council meeting, which is why I included it there again in November 6th. So that's really the first item I see is something that takes a relevant recommendation from the committee. And there would be more, and depending on what the committee wants, there could be many more if it's reporting, if it's other things they'd like to take to council. But, I think the obvious ones in my mind that are being addressed in the next 9 to 12 months is going to be the capital improvement plan. We're going to present a 5-year capital plan eventually that hopefully has more information because we have more data, because we've gotten the condition assessment work, we've done the work in-house that we're working on, we've populated the 5 years with what we think is accurate and relevant and can be accomplished. That's going to be included as part of the rate study. So that's one I see in the spring that is going to be something, we need to be concentrating on. In the meantime, there's a lot of information coming from us, and I just threw these out. If you look at the November 6th meeting, that's the one where maybe staff would be looking for that recommendation to adopt or have City Council adopt the FY21 CIP. And to George's point earlier, because I actually, as I spend all my time and energy trying to learn the electrical system, a map is everything. And I thought a good discussion would be, I like to call it a master plan, but here's our 5-year master plan for the projects that are in the electrical plan so that you understand them better, you know where they're located, you know what we're talking about, and George and Greg is talking about location and
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I was thinking if it's illegal or not allowed to put a map, just a schematic thing without even just saying here are the key nodes of the system, and we're trying to connect, without saying necessarily even where they are.
I would be very comfortable with putting them on a whiteboard, putting them in front of you, reviewing them with you. They wouldn't be on the video, and that's appropriate and okay.
Yeah, we can.
It's really public dissemination of that detailed information that's an issue.
Did you say you can send us, though, some basic, just to the committee, send some basic maps?
Yeah, that gets a little fuzzy. I'd rather present them.
Okay. I'm just trying to.
Because when we send them, then they, that turns into I don't think it's public information because it is protected by NRS. It's just caution more than anything.
Okay.
But on the slides you have, the maps are gone. Okay.
Yeah, you'll see they're not there, and I think it's even noted why they're not there.
Yeah, and that's something that's very safe. As an old guy that used to work power and water, you don't want to have that stuff out in the general public. They can raise a lot of problems.
That was a direct result of September 11. That's where that legislation came from.
Or if not a map, maybe an explanation in words. Okay, this thing connects to this thing, and that's why we're trying, I don't know, something that I can, because I'm a little bit lost, and that's my problem. I'm not as up to speed as you guys. But I think that's not necessarily a burden, because I think if I'm lost, the council's probably equally lost, with all due respect. They're even less technical people than I am.
I think in certain cases, if we were just going to focus on that, and we could talk to the city clerk, it's possible you could do some closed workshops. They wouldn't be open to the public if we really wanted to get that level of detail, and I think that's probably acceptable.
Well, it's just to understand what Greg's saying, because he has this detailed knowledge, and
it's important for the committee to understand it, and I think it's appropriate. I mean, this isn't a committee you've been sworn in to, protect and do all those things, so it's okay for the committee to understand this information. It's just, again, it's really an issue of public dissemination.
Yeah, I've been sitting here thinking, I know that the council is looking for us to come up with recommendations, and this is all new, pretty new stuff to us, and so it's difficult in the time frame we have to come up to speed on these things. Like I have a pretty good understanding, at least the electrical things I can look through, and I pretty have a good idea just about what every one of those projects is, just from where it's at. But my question is, it'd be nice to know just how serious the problem is, if there's any leeway that we can stretch those out a little ways, maybe extend them out 2 or 3 years.
Oh, you mean as far as the projects?
Yeah, what the timeline is. And
that, I think, is really going to come into play when we start looking at the scenarios that come out of the rate study, because they can real time, once they get their model completed, we can start moving projects around as long as they're not high priority.
Right, I understand.
We can move projects and see how that impacts.
Sure.
And they can put that right on the screen, and you can play with it to your heart's content.
Yeah, because
that actually is a model that gets left with us when they're done, so we can even drive that model, and as we start to modify or learn about new projects, we can build them into the model and see what the impact is. Sure. Which it's hard to do right now.
Yeah, because I really have no doubt that these things need to be done, because I'm pretty familiar with most of the system. And so I think it's a good idea, but whether we have to, but the time frame we can actually put around these things is, I think that'd be nice to identify and see if we've got some leeway, so we don't have to raise all this money and continue to raise money, if we can spread it out a little bit further and still get the work done. So.
Yep, and there is potential for that.
Yeah, okay.
So, and I'll give you an example, if just kind of buzz through what I showed there for the December 4th meeting. That's where I thought and we can, again, this is draft, and if you guys have any ideas, certainly we're open to any ideas. The electrical infrastructure capital plan and that master plan and those projects and understanding them a little better, I think, is good. And so I put that as an item for November 6th as well. We could do the electrical, so as an example of one that I don't think any action is necessary immediately, because the city adopted the electrical integrated resource plan review, but that was included as a review item for this committee to take a look at. And it's adopted, I think it's, if I remember right, it's from FY18 through FY22. But I think it's not a bad thing for the committee to look at, review, understand, not necessarily to make any modifications immediately, but to think about going forward, is there something we want to look at, or you want the utility to start looking at from a programmatic, energy conservation issues? Do we want to give you some data on, the pool pump replacement program and the AC replacement program and how much money we're spending on that? Because we don't provide a lot of that data, frankly, and we probably should be. And our demands have remained flat, so the programs appear to be working because we are adding a small amount of population, and we do track that demand data, and we know how many of those. So that kind of stuff, that I don't think there's anything immediate that the committee needs to do. More importantly, the committee needs to understand what's in that plan to think about it as we move forward. And so I put that as a December 4th meeting item. Again, I don't think there's any real action item necessarily immediately, or probably even the next 6 months to a year. I think likely we'll have the rate study on an update on every meeting going forward until, there's a resolution and a recommendation from the committee. So that would just be a standing item. I think, Larry, you had requested, let's just keep the CIP plan as a standing item. I think that makes sense. And sometimes that may be more discussion, and sometimes it might be less, just depending on what else we're doing. I do think we need to start talking about the operations and maintenance budget in FY21, because if you look at the city schedule, they start discussing it with the city council in February. So we need to start looking at that even before then. A good one, I think, that does deserve potentially maybe some action by the committee is, if you look in January, by the way, the first Wednesday in January is January 1st, so we'll have to figure out a new date for that, but that's why there's a TBD there, to be decided. Again, rate study update, we can include a discussion on the capital plan, which I think at that point in time will be driven by the rate study update anyway. I do get a lot of feedback, and I'm not going to say it's a ton of feedback, but we do get comments and public, you guys, looks like you waste a lot of water, we're in the desert, and we do follow the majority of the SNWA and regional water conservation plan and programs. A lot of that's development driven, which we don't have a lot of that, but our developers do abide by those. But we also have a lot of turf in the city, and I guess the question in the public's mind is, do we need to be a little more mindful of that? Do we need to promote turf removal as a city? Do we need to look at it maybe a little different from an operations perspective? Because right now we're very passive. We don't aggressively go after water waste. We don't have the staff to do that sort of thing. If we get a call, we'll take a look at it, or we'll send somebody out. But it's certainly not comparable to what they're doing in the valley. And so I think that does deserve some discussion. So what I put on the January meeting was here's what the resource plan looks like for SNWA, and here's what the conservation program is, and here's what we do as the operation side of that. Does that require immediate attention? No, but I think it's something we need to think about in the next 6 to 12 months.
Maybe something might be considered with the public golf course. We're doing that turf removal and everything. that we document that and show that as a snapshot of what kind of savings we can accomplish with that outline border areas that are got green grass in it. We're going to do xeriscape and everything like that. That might be something to do a little short video on and put it on the city website if people want to see it, because I think that would be quite interesting for
Right.
people to see.
And they are taking a hard look at those, basically the non-playable areas. You know, there probably will be some folks that aren't happy with that, taking a lot of that turf out. But you know, the fact of the matter is, they don't come if it doesn't come into play. If you're a golfer, which for me, just about everything comes into play, but for real golfers, it doesn't. So we're going to go through that process while we're looking at the golf course irrigation design, and do exactly what you said. Not only track it, see what it costs, how much was the rebate. How quick of a return on that investment do we think we're going to get?
Yeah, I was going to ask if that qualifies for the $3 square foot rebate.
It's up to a limit. They raised that limit for the larger projects, so that's good. As we work through that project, and I'm just kind of indirectly involved, they are working with SNWA. Patrick Watson is kind of the guy at SNWA who helps with that. So we'll have all the numbers. We'll be able to promote that project. I think is a good sustainability, cost savings, conservation project when it's all said and done as well.
The reason I'm bringing that up is SNWA is contributing funding into the water fund from a tax base, and that might be something to consider, to use a portion of that for rebates for lawn removal or greens, you know, to get xeriscape on Boulder City citizens' property.
That's certainly, those type of options are things that can look at. In one of my former previous jobs over on the other side of the hill, we did some, basically kind of matched it. The utility matched what the SNWA provided, and the Parks and Recreation folks did a lot of the work in-house so that it was almost very close to a cost-neutral upgrade, even without the water savings. But obviously it required some operating costs up front. But again, we do get a lot of feedback on that very item, and so I think it's something this committee should take a look at.
For me, the concern in one number is if you do the 3 billion gallons a year Lake Mead water that we use, it's about 600 gallons per person per day. Now, admittedly, that's everything, but that's a gigantic number to my mind. And I don't think it's the risks of us being able to continue to do that are large. I think there's a threat to our water supply where we might have to consider drastic cuts. But anyway, that's speculating about the future.
Well, since you brought that up, I think I can talk about this. We are also participating in the Southern Nevada Water Authority's training and education on, AWWA has a procedure for calculating water loss, essentially, and unmetered, essentially, water, and how much do we lose in the system just by leakage, and we do have higher pressures, and so we'll have a better handle within the next 12 months on, how much water we're not accounting for, and that'll help us drive some of that as well. That's kind of on the system side, but again, the demand side drives some of those decisions we might need to make in the future. And I think if we do that through a good public meeting, public involvement process, so they don't get overly concerned that we're, taking out tons of grass and parks and tons of, not, because the parks are where people do go to recreate, and, the SNWA program, allows for that because that's what it's for. It's recreational. But I think if you remember when John Ensminger was here, if you were there at that council meeting, essentially the SNWA's view, and I like the simple term they use, if the only guy on the grass is the guy that's mowing it, it probably shouldn't be there. And I do think we have some of that, so we should think about that. Again, that's not an immediate, but I do think it's one of those items, to your point, George, we should be in a timeline that we start discussing, and I think it's a good one for this committee to eventually have some recommendations on in the next 12 months, plus or minus. The landfill, I just really threw that on there. We did include some funding in the consultant's scope of work to look at the landfill. I just want to have the committee think about, to what extent do we need to go into that? And clearly we have a long-term contract. There are some capital projects, but they're not huge. How much time and energy we spend on that in the very near future, in my staff opinion, is that one can be pushed out and we can deal with it. Let's address electrical, water, sewer, get that resolved, get those rate issues resolved, and then we can start seeing if there's issues we need to drill down on the landfill.
Yeah, I think January we might need to see how we're pushing forward, how much time we have in January, whether we, if that can be like a 15-minute discussion just to say, here's the landfill, we're starting it, but it's not as important.
And it's
as the
really
rest of
give
what
me
you
some
said.
feedback, and let's deal with everything else and come back in 6 months, that's perfectly fine with me.
Yeah, I think we're in a good aspect there. So, because a lot of this, if I understand correctly too, we'll see each meeting how we're dealing with it and what we want to go with. But I think, George, if we're going forward, and the idea, if I understand, the big one right now is the rate study. That's
Sure.
the big item, and it does interact with the with what the council had asked us to do. So I think we're okay. I think tonight's discussion, I think, on the capital projects was part of what that's
Sure.
doing, and that's what I was discussing as a motion. So that would be part of the report, in my opinion, George, is that we would go forward. So I believe we're doing that each meeting. We're trying to keep on the mission, and then trying to understand things better.
And we could formulate some of what we think recommendations are moving forward, but I do want to, throw out items so that we're thinking about them. And I think that's really what you're talking about, right, George?
No, that's exactly what I was looking for. And I think, again, with only 4 members being here, I'd like to hear to get a sense of what the committee thinks. Again, going back to the resolution, seeing how do we have a sort of agreed interpretation on what we think. We've never really discussed that, like what we ought to be doing. We're doing stuff, but we never quite discussed what the game plan is.
Right. And hopefully this is a good start.
This is a good start. Yeah, I agree. I appreciate you doing this. We have to. We can't be completely separated from these timelines, otherwise,
right.
It doesn't.
And
Yeah.
I'll finish yakking here in a second, but I want to flip over the backside, and you can see some of the future meetings there. What I really wanted to. And I'm showing there, will we have rate recommendations by March 4th? Some of that's dependent on results of studies. I'm cautious, if that's the right word. I want the committee to know, it's going to be, this is a really tight schedule. And whether we can really get to a point where we're ready to make a recommendation with regards to rates, one, we don't know what the impact even is, negative or positive. 2, are we going to have all the information we need to be comfortable on the capital plan, because we do have other things going on that we're depending on. And then if you look at this tied to the city's schedule in April and May, it's going to be tough. So I think we just want to throw that out, food for thought. If we have to do the rate, if there's rate adjustments, even if it's not a rate increase, but we're changing structure, the easiest way to do it is through the budget process. But I'm thinking it's going to be difficult to do, which just means we would be off. And it's not necessarily even an industry standard to do your rate recommendations outside the budget process. It's not a big deal. I think we just kind of in our minds, we were hoping, let's try to tie it into the budget process timing wise. what it really means is you basically, the only really thing it does is if there's a revenue requirement and you're delaying some potential additional revenue that's needed, you'll have to deal with that in the rate study. And it also means we would have to go through the business impact statement process separate from the budget, which is just really, it's work for staff, more work for staff, but it's not, I think what I'm trying to say is I want to make sure we have all as good a data as we possibly can. If that means we don't match with the city's final budget process, we just need to keep that in mind as we move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good
Make any
start.
sense?
Yeah, it's a good start, and I appreciate the timeline. And I think I'd like to revisit this. Hopefully people will show up and we can revisit this. And if they don't want to, that's okay too. I'm just one guy.
I'm kind of looking at this as a living document.
Yeah.
So any comments you guys want to give or feedback give to us, or modifications we want to make, or obviously other things will come up and we'll add them to the list.
No, I agree. I thanks to everybody for this. This is good. I think we want to keep it going. So I think some of these things, as we've said, if we can just sort of keep on the agenda, just so at least we can discuss them. The other thing too, I brought up a few times, and maybe even with the rate process going on, it'd be something we forgot to bring up at the other meeting, is that with the rate process, you're saying we might not make this budget timeframe, but if looking at the affordability, and if we are not needing major income, one thing could be recommended that we don't do a rate increase until like October, so you don't hit somebody.
That's a good example of something
July.
We could do. Yep.
October.
And by the way, from my perspective as a utility director, I would recommend, even if you put it in the budget, that the implementation is still October.
That's what I would suggest.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's something. It's a more mellow month.
Yes,
I'm not
I agree. Except for the golf course.
No, I'm not sure I agree with that at all, because that's just saying, well, we'll hit them when they don't notice. They'll be too dumb to see we've raised the rates if we raise them when they're not paying a lot. I think we should raise them in July.
From a conservation perspective, that's a good point.
I mean, it's saying, well, we're going to sneak this in, then the next July they're going to be hit and say, what the hell happened? And
No, we're not going to sneak anything in. That's exactly what we're not going to do.
Right, because what's not even shown on this is the public process we'll have to go through.
Exactly.
And that's what I'm saying, when you look at this schedule with just the budget for the city, there's our process we're going through, and then we got to throw in here some public process. So I just think it's something we need to keep talking about as we get data back. If we have to push out, then we have to push it out.
I think it's good to make clear that if we're raising the rates, here's what we think your rates will be. You know, the idea of doing it on October, I don't quite see the point of why October, why not July? What's the argument?
You know what, I'll let the committee contemplate that as we move forward.
Yeah, I've been there and done that, and it hurts a lot, especially July is bad enough anyway, but if you put a 5 or 10% increase on top of it.
Of course it hurts, that's my point.
Yeah,
but now
well,
you're hoping they don't notice that it hurts.
There's a big public uprising that probably doesn't need to happen,
Why doesn't it need to happen?
because in October it'll go a lot easier.
No, I just, this is on TV, I mean, I don't know what to say.
Well,
I rest
there's
my
one way to
case.
get the word out there, but I think if you ask the general public, they would much rather see it come in October.
I think it's a reasonable debate to have in the committee.
I think they don't want to see it at all.
Well,
So-
nobody wants to see a rate increase, right? So.
Anyway, that's a whole other can of worms, but I've heard that, I jumped on it because I've heard this mentioned before by a councilman, and I think it's, so I'm not sure the IQ of our population is quite that low anyway, but I just to say, well, we'll hit you, you know, it's going to hurt the next July. So it's saying, well, anyway, this isn't the time and place to discuss that.
Well, just to give you a heads up, though, it's not going to be till next July. You have still a lot of people in Boulder City that are on the full electric, so they're going to feel it in January. So really, a lot of people would, and some people that can't even afford it will. So in October, what you're doing is you're easing them into it. It's not a sneaking thing; it's a matter of easing into it. And so, and that's it. Just I thought I'd bring it up now because maybe that's something we could discuss, and it would be sort of an alternative or something we could look at with the rate process and the consultant, and see what other things have happened. So that's
And they can easily do the math if they're, let's just as an example, there is a increase of some sort required if it's not done in July and you wait till October. Is it a big impact? Probably not. They can run the numbers. So that's, take a look at this, review it, think about it. Really, the focus is on the capital plan, the rate study, and then everything else we can do at hopefully a reasonable pace.
So the one thing, this sort of leads into the next agenda. So does your director's report lead into the next agenda too, or do we want to just sort of taking your example here and saying what we want to do for next agenda? And I think we have 2 meetings going forward, possibly. So I was wanted to double check on the October 28th meeting, if that was.
Yes, and that was the last thing I wanted to mention, so thank you for bringing it up, because I almost forgot. We have set aside a date there. The consultant believes they'll have some good information by the 28th if we wanted to do a separate workshop. That's on a Monday. Probably do that at 6:30. We only have 4 of you here, but if the 4 of you are open to that, we can get that out to the others to see if they're available and make sure we have a quorum. And I would recommend that we'd go ahead and do that. And it would be just that item, mostly informational from the consultant on what they've learned so far.
Yeah. Do we have to have a quorum on that meeting or not?
Yes.
Are you available on the 28th, Ned?
I was not going to be, but I would be. If it comes to that, I will be here.
And then George?
Yes.
So Greg, what?
28th of what?
Of October.
Of October. So we would be, I believe Parks and Rec still has their afternoon meeting.
They already had one, so I don't think they have one this month.
Oh, that's even easier. So we can set it at whatever time you would like. I would just say 6 o'clock. It would be okay.
Okay, yeah, so if everybody here is a quorum, then I'd like to get it so we keep it moving forward.
Okay.
Just check with Tammy on that, but I'm pretty sure they.
Yeah, I'll verify that first thing in the morning. We'll send out the invite first thing in the morning
To
for
everyone,
6
yes.
o'clock on the 28th.
Okay, thank you very much.
Am I the next item?
Yeah, then we'll, update.
Director's update. So I threw this on there just to, we do have things that happen and updates that, we've presented information. I don't want to stay quiet on it, right? I mean, we've talked about the golf course. That's a good one to throw out there. We have completed the modeling to convert the municipal golf course to raw water. It does look like it will work. We're being a little bit cautious because, when we irrigate the golf courses, they take all the water at night, so that demand is really high because everything essentially irrigates at night at the same time at one time over that 12-hour-ish period. So whatever that max day demand is, you got to double that gallons per minute and to be conservative. It does impact the system somewhat. We think there's some options there to work through that, but so I'm being optimistically cautious that we'll still be able to do it. It may be as simple as having to put that the east raw water tank back in service, which we have out of service. We just need to take a look at it to see that it's in a condition to put back in service. I know it needs a recoating on the inside. Coating on the outside can happen whenever it needs to happen, but the area that's impacted in the system is right there by that tank, so I'm pretty sure if we put the tank in service, it'll solve that pressure problem.
What is Boulder City Parkway going to be using?
I should know the answer to that, but I think it is potable, but I'd have to ask that question. I don't know. I should know that, but I don't. I think it's potable. I don't think they ran a raw line down there. The raw line goes down the Veterans. But let me verify that.
So if it does run down Veterans, we could actually tap it at Veterans in Boulder City Parkway.
Possibly, and they might be. It's just I
love seeing
haven't
purple
been smart
pipe.
enough to ask that. I agree. Make the investment. We might as well use it.
So are we talking, you're still putting the water, you're going to be,
We're still planning on putting the raw water on the municipal course. It just, when you run the model, there's a negative pressure result in a location. Fortunately, it's right by that tank, so I think if we put that tank in service, it solves the problem.
yeah, I guess.
But that tank is out of service, and there's a cost to putting it back in services, which we probably need to recoat the inside at a minimum.
Okay, no, I guess what I was thinking is, if I understand the Boulder City Parkway, we're just starting the major project. And so is that being planned with potable, or is it?
That's what he was asking, and I don't know the exact answer, so I'm gonna go find that out and send you guys the answer tomorrow morning.
Because that would be something that I would think.
Yeah, you'd want to do now.
Change now.
No, yeah, you'd want to change now if you could do it now. And it may be that it is, and I just don't
Well,
know.
is it a real large user? Because a large
No.
user, sometimes it's hard to justify.
It is
running a
not,
system
it's
like
not a large user, but it's right there where the pipeline is. So
Yeah, that's true.
my thought process is maybe they probably did, I just don't know. We are continuing to have discussions with the SNWA on, what can we could potentially do with the effluent from the treatment plant. I anticipate some feedback from them on, I do know, that's something they're seriously looking at to get the water back in, the resource back in either the river or the lake. I think within the next 30 to 60 days, we'll start getting some information on that. Obviously, how that would impact Boulder City is going to be the question for us, what the cost would be to do that, who's going to pay for all that stuff. Well, that'll be further discussion.
They just announced tonight that they are in concert with North Vegas, Henderson to offset the cost of pumping the water as a resource. So we might entertain that idea with SNWA as to see if they'll offset the cost if we have to pump it up over the hill by Railroad Pass.
Correct. I think when they have a better idea what the upfront capital costs are and those operating costs is, then they'll be ready to come have that discussion. Then what I can tell you is I know they're getting close to having those numbers for us to take a look at. And it would be something we could include in the future, probably first of the year. Maybe sooner, but probably first of the year. Just real quick update on condition assessment work. The scope of work for the consultant on the water and sewer has been a little more, not necessarily complicated, but when we do the scope of work for a rate study is pretty much the same for every rate study, and it's fast. In the case of getting into the details of the scope on the water and sewer condition assessment, it's just taken a little bit of time, so we're hoping to get that to council soon. In the meantime, we're collecting a ton of data so that they can hit the road running. It's just taken a little more time than I had hoped, but it involves a little more than even I anticipated, because we did start talking about some more programmatic issues with regards to the backflow prevention program, meter replacement, some of those things that aren't necessarily condition assessment, but their programs were lacking in. So as part of their work, we also wanted to take a look at what those programs would cost us. We know we don't have only 1,000-ish of our water meters are automated. So should we need to put a meter replacement program with automated meters on the water side? The director's opinion is yes, but there's nothing in the capital program right now that even has that. So some of those items we're working into the scope and trying to stay within budget, so it's just taking a little bit longer, which feeds back into the discussion we had earlier. So, and that's all I have for tonight.
Any other comments about that? Sure. Okay, thank you. I guess, so as relating to, we discussed at the minutes earlier, that would be, I think, the director's report. If we could lay that one out a little bit better, is there a way we could sort of line some of the things out? Just what a quick blurb that the assessment's going forward, but the
Oh, you mean as far as actually in the agenda item, or as
No,
far
it-
as we
no.
provide you a report?
No, what's actually, that's one where the minutes
Oh, as
might
soon
want to
as
be,
we-
lay the minutes out a little bit more. So that would be outlined in the minutes a little better. So instead of having just said,
Gotcha. I
a
gotcha.
sentence
Okay.
says the utility director reported, can we just have
Yes.
a few just
I got what you're saying, yes, yeah.
bullet, and even sometimes,
Right.
is the minutes able to be nice with a bullet item, just quick bullet items of what?
Yeah, the minutes are essentially a summary, and, in some cases, we're very detailed and too detailed, and they do need to include action items. I think important issues, you spend a little more detail on, but really, they're a summary, and yes, we can summarize.
Okay.
Everything I just said, we could just put as topics discussed.
Well, no, that's when actually I'm sorry, I said the opposite, that those are some of the things that would be good to see in writing, that the consultants can take a little longer, something like that.
And we could, and it could still be bullet points.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, yes,
That's
yeah,
what I'm
got
saying.
it. Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so now I guess we're discussion of next meeting agenda. Do you want to start, George?
Yeah, so I'd like to try and get my item in again with the language that I want. So it's preliminary discussion of timescales for completing tasks assigned to the committee by the resolution. I'd like to.
Write that down.
I can email it to you if you want.
I think we got it on the audio. We're good.
So, but again, the logic being, let's go from the resolution, which is why we're here, but all this information you've put in there is very useful, because it doesn't make sense if we're completely decoupled from this stuff. But I would like to see that, to at least try it.
Yeah, and we could actually embed those in here, because
So-
they come out what has been directed to the committee. This work is pretty much necessary to do that.
Let's at least give it a shot with the committee. If they go like, no, we don't want to do that, that's fine. We'll defer. But I'd like to try that just for my peace of mind to say because I think that's what the council is going to look at since they created the resolution.
I can certainly take a shot at embedding into this where there are action items by the committee that are my guesses, and then the committee can review it and provide feedback.
Well, I think what we're looking for too is we need probably at least a brief type of report to the council, maybe by maybe in January. I'm not sure we've done enough to do something similar to that, and since December is a pretty busy month, it might not be the best idea to do that. But I think if we do sort of plan on having something January, just even a comment. But the other thing too is can we hear back from we could try to interact with the council somehow.
So that
and
was
make
another
sure.
item. Eventually, we're definitely going to need them to bring them in. And so we probably should contemplate, and I think what we would have to contemplate is that a joint workshop, or is it just information we take to the council? I kind of like the idea of a joint workshop, but I think we should talk about that a little bit and moving forward. Sometime between now and January, I think a workshop would be good for a lot of different reasons. Philosophy about what to do with some of the revenue sources is going to be an important one for the rate consultant. Are we going to continue to utilize solar lease revenue? Those types of discussions that are important for the calculation of what's going to happen with the rates. Those are really policy decisions and recommendations that need to probably come from us, but final decisions, obviously, council. But I think it would be good in a workshop forum, we all get some good feedback. So
Maybe if we put that on the agenda for workshop discussions or future workshops.
Yep.
I guess that way we could discuss it. And so if we could have that on the next agenda, discussion of future workshops,
Okay.
because I think that's a good idea. And
Discussion items for future workshops.
Turn your mic on, please.
discussion items for future workshops?
Or what, how about discussion of future workshops and items? Because if we just sort of say we're going to have a workshop, we could plan on a workshop every month if it's feasible, and then say items for that. It's just a thought, to see what everybody's schedule is, because it sounds like it would be good to have a workshop early in December if people are available, as long with the, and then maybe that's where we put the council. So as George has mentioned, the more people we have next, more the committee members we have would be helpful. So hopefully, I think we're missing some, again, next meeting. I'm not sure how many.
Well, there's we could contemplate or consider using the December 4th meeting as a workshop. That's an option.
Well, we could do that next time, yes. It's an if we don't have enough time, but we've got the rate study would have to be part of the workshop.
Well, I think we would do something different with these. I'm just sitting here thinking about the difficulty sometimes getting council scheduled and the schedules combined. So we know this is a set date. We can look and see if council availability is there for this date as an option.
Okay.
I think what would be useful is to get some kind of feedback from them, since they were so adamant about the creation of this committee, at least two of them, to see whether they think we're, on track or what they want from us, just to have some kind of dialogue. That would be my idea.
I think that's a good idea.
So, we've got the items we've discussed for the agenda, and you've got, so yours is the capital improvement projects review and the infrastructure, and then we have the other ones that George had and the ongoing for so the discussion of the next meetings for agenda we want on there continually, and then now we're saying for workshops. Anything else that we're looking at?
I think that's enough.
No, well, it's plenty. That's the problem we've got, is it's too much, I agree. But we've got to keep moving forward. And so then I just want to concern, so we are putting that the 28th is the date for the workshop?
Yep.
Okay.
And I have gotten, the consultant is available for that date. So.
Okay. Okay. So is there anything else on discussion of the agenda? Okay, then I will move to the last public comments. Okay.
Okay, thanks. I just have to say that I really enjoyed the Silver State Energy Association presentation tonight on where the power comes from, how we get billed, and I thought it was as a customer of the Boulder City Utility Department and a ratepayer, I'm very interested in what's going to be coming forward. I reviewed the unaudited accounting for the year ending June 30, 2019, that the finance director presented at one of the July city council meetings. And in reviewing the electrical departments, including the admin, the revenues over expenses were $3.5 million more came in than went out. And that added to the ending fund balance in the utility departments of $64.4 million available going forward. So I'll be very interested in hearing what the rate study comes up with and what you all, the city council, and come up for the new rate study anyway. And then the other question I had was, at the end of the last meeting, someone asked that the committee be given information on all the information that was provided to the consultants for the rate study, and I wondered if you all ever received that. Thank you very much.
Marty, would you get your name, I guess?
Oh, I'm sorry. Martin Reel, long-time resident, yes.
Thank you.
I apologize. Actually, that was on my director's report. I couldn't read my own writing. So yes, the committee will be receiving emails shortly where you'll have access to the FTP site where all the data is being delivered and stored. That'll be used with the rate study. So you should see that in your email box relatively soon.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Dennis, for getting the SCE here. We do appreciate your efforts in getting these different organizations. Oh, could somebody turn off the podium mic? Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. So like I said, again, thank you, Dennis, for getting the different presentations. So I guess we will have the presentation will just be a general one from the city then, and on the 11th then. I mean, that's the 6th. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Sorry for the long meeting, but I think we gained a lot of data, and I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you. So I guess I will have a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Everybody vote? Yeah, okay, we're done. Thank you.